Please appreciate that this presentation has been prepared with all sincerity and to the best of knowledge of students, teachers, and volunteers. We welcome words of encouragement and also suggestions for improvement. For use in academics or any kind of exams, please verify and correlate with your coursebooks. For becoming an associate and or for sending contributions in different subjects, including storytelling, please get in touch with your brief profile at baskinjoy@gmail.com. So when you look at a map of 18th century Europe, you'll see that there were no nation states that had people of a common origin. There were different kingdoms and empires that ruled over areas of land that had different types of people who spoke different languages and didn't have any sense of common identity. For example, if you look at the Habsburg Empire here, you'll see that there's different German-speaking regions over here. You'll find that there's Italian-speaking regions over here. You'll find there's Polish groups over here. There's also different, and now that's different type of language groups. Now there's also different type of ethnicities. For example, these are Bohemians over here, and in different places you'll have different types of Slovaks, Slovenes, and just a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of different language groups. So basically, it's just a mess of a mixture of different types of groups and peoples in during 18th century. And so we've looked at a case in France of how its people ended up forming a common identity for themselves. So now today we're going to see how that same process of finding a common identity for yourself happened in different areas of Europe. So we're going to begin our discussion of how this movement of nationalism happened in Europe with the rise of the middle class. So in Western and some of Central Europe, so basically Central Europe is around here, so like you can say basically this region over here, there was a huge growth of industrial production here, and there's a lot of trade that happened, which led to a rapid growth in towns. So you have industrial production, and so a lot of towns starts rising over here. So सबसे पहले इंग्लैंड में इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन हुआ, फिर उसके बाद फ्रांस में इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन हुआ, फिर जर्मन रीजन्स में हुआ, and then in some of Central Europe and then Eastern Europe, यहाँ पे सबसे late industrial production हुआ, तो यहाँ पे सबसे late हुई middle classes की emergence. So with industrialization and industrial production, there was a growth in people who were industrialists, more businessmen began coming around, and there was a lot of more professional jobs. And all of these different types of people, industrialists, businessmen, and professionals who came about because of this rise in industrial production, we call these the middle classes. And it was from these middle classes where the ideas of national unity began to get formed. And so these ideas of unity, of national unity, were formed in opposition to the ideas of aristocracy. So in Europe, aristocracy was a class of people who were able to take advantage of the lack of unity, who were able to take advantage of the fact that there was no unity among people. So we've seen over here previously in the slide how there was just a big mess of a big mess and a big mixture of different types of ethnicities and groups of people. And so what the aristocracy did was that they took advantage that there was no unity among these people. And what they did was that eventually so they took advantage of this lack of unity, and because they were able to do that, they owned large estates, which were like large regions of land and townhouses. They spoke French, and married each other so that they can become even stronger. And so in Western Europe, there were peasants so in like Western Europe over here, what the aristocracy did was that they forced peasants to work for their townhouses and do farming in their townhouses and estates. And in Eastern and Central Europe, maybe estates होते थे, and इनमें लोगों को serfs बनाते थे. So basically, serfs are like kind of like a form of slavery. So in Eastern and Central Europe, they would the aristocracy, they would force people to become slaves and work in their townhouses and estates. So in Western Europe, the peasants had some more freedom because they weren't really slaves. But in Eastern and Central Europe, the aristocracy were able to make the peasants their slaves. And so in peasants may कोई unity नहीं थी, as we've talked about, and so the aristocrats took advantage of that and they forced them to work for them. But with industrialization, the people got smarter and the middle class rose, who started talking about freeing themselves from the aristocrats. And so this middle class who wanted to free themselves from the aristocrats, wanted to free themselves from that oppression, from that slavery, they began to talk about this idea of liberalism. They were big fans of liberalism. And so when we talk about liberalism, we can talk about it both in a political and economic context. And so when we talk about it politically, liberalism means freedom for the individual. It means talking about equality before the law. It means government by the consent, which is basically a democracy. Liberalism means having a constitution and having a representative government through parliament. And so all of these ideas, freedom, equality, democracy, constitution, parliament, all of these come under the idea of liberal nationalism when we talk about it politically. So you have all of these amazing ideas about having a free society. But then when this idea of liberal nationalism was actually applied, like it was in France, then we don't really have that much freedom, as you can see. For example, in France, when liberal nationalism was applied, um, there was no equality before the law for everyone, and only men with property could vote. So not everyone could vote, and so basically you can see here how you have an ideology of what liberal nationalism should be like. But once when it is actually applied like it was in France, then everyone didn't get that amount of freedom, everyone didn't get that equality. There was only some portion of society that did get those freedoms and did get that type of equality. And so um now we can let's talk about what liberal nationalism means in the economic context. And so when we talk about a liberal economy, we are talking about freedom of markets and removing restrictions, removing barriers, removing taxes, removing duties, removing everything that would um, not allow movement of goods and capitals to take place. So uh, so we've talked about previously how Napoleon made the economy more liberal. He brought freedom to the markets. Napoleon already removed tariffs, duties, and used a uniform system of measurements in France. Now we're going to see how Napoleon applied these ideas of liberal nationalism to Germany specifically. Now, think of this like a case study. So, back then, Germany wasn't actually a country like it is today. Instead, there were a lot of different regions under different kingdoms and aristocrats that spoke the language of German. And so, when I say Germany here, I don't mean the country Germany, I'm talking about different regions that happen to have the same German language, which is common in between them. So all of these different regions, as you can see here, they all of them have their own currencies. All of them have their own weights and measures, and so there's no uniform system of money and measurements in any of these regions here. And so we've already seen how not having a uniform system makes it hard to trade. So if you wanted to go through, say, this place to this place, you'd have to go through 11 borders, and every time you passed each border, you'd have to pay a lot of taxes. And those taxes which you would have to pay were calculated by using that region's system of weights and measures. So each region has a different system of weights and measures, so you would pay different taxes in each region. And उस time पे computers तो होते नहीं थे, so that would make trade extremely difficult, calculating all those taxes and managing all those logistics. So so trading in these regions was basically a huge mess, and it was extremely hard for the economy to function. But there was this group of people in Prussia. This is Prussia right over here. And so this is like a major region, a major powerful region of Germany. And so this region realized that this is a big mess and this makes trade really hard. So they formed a customs union, which is known as the Zollverein. And so this Zollverein, this customs union, is basically a big organization, and they partnered up with different German regions. And by partnering up, they abolished all of those different taxes, tariff barriers, all of those restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. And by abolishing those barriers, economy began to flourish. They also reduced the amount of currencies from over 30 to just two currencies. And उन्होंने फिर transportation को भी improve किया. They created railway networks, so it became easier to trade between different regions. So liberal nationalism kept spreading like this, like how it was implemented in Germany to different regions in Napoleon's empire. But eventually, this movement of liberal nationalism was crushed because in 1815, Napoleon was defeated and his entire empire was fell. It was in this battle called the Battle of Waterloo. So Napoleon's empire fell, and it was the empires of Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria that managed to defeat Napoleon. And so these four empires, they met in Vienna, which is the capital of Austria. And because it was held in Vienna, people call it the Vienna Congress. And this Congress, it was held by the Austrian Chancellor, Duke Metternich. And what all of these different empires, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, what they did was that they created the Treaty of Vienna. And so this treaty, it basically undid everything that Napoleon had done. All of those new ideas that he brought, all of those were undid by these four empires. And so, firstly, if you look at this map here of what the Treaty of Vienna actually caused, in France, the Bourbon dynasty, which had existed before the French Revolution, it was put back into power. And there's also new countries that were created around France, so it would become harder for them to ever create an empire again. So you have the Kingdom of the Netherlands that was created here, and so it would become hard for France to invade again because it had to go through the Kingdom of Netherlands, then Germany, then all of these different countries. And that just makes it hard to create an empire. And so new countries were created around France. And now Prussia, so what happened with Prussia was that it got new regions that were added to it. Austria had new regions added to it of northern Italy over here. And then Prussia also got some of Poland. Russia also got part of Poland. And so basically you just had all the winners, they got new regions added to it. And France, it just, they got regions taken away from it. Simple as that. So all of these empires were redrawing the map of Napoleon's empire, but they didn't completely disregard everything that Napoleon did. They used his modern techniques of efficient bureaucracy, free economy, and the abolition of feudalism, and they used them to strengthen traditional ideas, strengthen traditional institutions. They used the ideas of Napoleon to make the monarchy and the church a lot stronger. These people were known as the conservatives. And so these conservatives, they were basically polar opposites of what liberals wanted. So liberals, they wanted democracy, a parliament, and constitution. But what the conservatives wanted, they wanted a monarchy and a strong sense of religion. And so all of these conservatives, they began to gain power after Napoleon fell. And they started censoring newspapers, books, plays, songs. They banned everything that talked about liberty, democracy, and liberal ideas in general. And so this entire movement of liberal nationalism began to be suppressed by conservatives, and this eventually led to a lot more revolutions, which we'll talk about in the next